When you look at leases are contracts between landlords and tenants. And most of the time, the tenant will sign up to a lease that will have many pages of covenants, promises made back to the landlord in terms of when the lease is running and what happens when the lease comes to an end. The concept of yielding up or reinstating at the end of the lease means that the tenant will need to look to the terms of the lease plus any supplemental agreements for licences to alter and then adhere to those terms unless, for example, the landlord decides that he wants to keep some of the tenant alterations for himself, in which case then some form of bargain will be struck. Now, when the lease is running, and even with the liability running after the end of the lease, repair and dealing with defects are two different words. The concept of a defect is something is missing for completeness. And therefore, if you look at the covenants under the lease, it may well be that the landlord is responsible for rectifying any defects and that obligation doesn't pass to the tenant. However, typically in English law, particularly with commercial properties, we have found that over the time, tenants have been responsible for undertaking repairs. And the concept of repair is something is wearing out. So in theory, it starts off in one state, and if it moves to a worse state, that means the tenant will then be picking up the repairing obligation. Now, when we look at leases are not all the same. So you may find certain leases might say the tenant has to keep in repair. Other leases might say that the tenant has to put and keep in repair. And this is where the surveyor, or indeed the property advisor, might often have to go and look at cases to work out where these terms mean. And indeed, we have a very famous case from the end of the 19th century called Proudfoot and Hart that looked at the terms of whether keeping in repair and putting and keeping were the same thing or whether they were different. And the judge in that case came to the conclusion that in order to keep something in repair, you had to put it in repair first. So, whilst the words look different in a tenancy or a lease, the words actually mean the same thing.